it's easy to make the mistake to think that if you're using a whole bunch of systems that, if you read their terms and conditions, they say we are GDPR compliant, we are ISO 27001 compliant, that you are compliant, because it's not the case. It's very easy to use systems in a way that contravenes what is required to be GDPR compliant. As a Google Workspace example, right? It's got strong capabilities for you to restrict who gets to see what documents. But if you use it wrong and you just share something to an entire organization or publicly, then you've breached GDPR, as an example. Same thing with HubSpot. Whilst it's now got the tools and it's got the encryption underneath, it's still up to the users to configure those user permissions correctly and all of that. And so it's really important that beyond just adopting technology that is compliant, that everybody using it is fully educated. They understand what is the GDPR, what is sensitive data, what do risks look like in my day-to-day, because technology by itself is not going to solve the problem. My name's Rowan. I am our CTO at Huble. I oversee two technology departments, our software engineering team and our solution architecture team, both very much around HubSpot delivery to our customers. And previously, I have been involved in our IT and compliance team, setting up our compliance to things like ISO 27001 and working on our data privacy compliance. The first time I sort of encountered that was probably back in 2015-ish, when the GDPR started becoming a topic of discussion, right? Back then it wasn't a thing, it wasn't in place yet. But that's when it started kind of making the rounds, and understanding around this new law around data privacy was going to be coming into be in 2018. So it was sort of enforced from 2016, but then was fully enforced from 2018. So a lot of businesses, and at the time I was doing a lot of development on a product that was in the medical litigation space, a SaaS product. And so they were dealing with sensitive data, and they were based in the UK. And so we had a lot of talk about, well, what does this mean for the business? What does this mean in terms of how we build our product and how we're going to manage sensitive data? And so ever since around about 2015 is where it started becoming a real talking point and having major influence on how we ran the business and how we built our products. We actually saw this a couple of times, was in the sort of senior living or sort of assisted living space, working in sort of the marketing area, supporting businesses like that. They had to deal, well, that industry, they have to deal with a lot of sensitive data around prospective people who are looking to move into assisted living, and the criteria by which, you need to assess what kind of place is good for somebody, or even start targeting in terms of marketing and all of that is based on information, health information, other sensitive information, and being able to capture that in your CRM or in a marketing platform and being able to use it legally for a long time was really challenging. And, you had specific systems that could capture that kind of information, but weren't really on a cutting edge of being able to be, they weren't really great marketing platforms or marketing automation platforms, but those platforms didn't support their data. So for a while, we had several customers in that kind of industry that really struggled to put something together that actually worked and allowed them to hit their targets. So before HubSpot introduced these features, I guess what I've seen in both that industry that we're talking about, the sort of senior living, assisted living industry, I've seen in others, education, that kind of thing. We've seen businesses essentially tied into the software that they are using, which is, these systems that do support the capture of that data, and essentially molding their business processes around what the technology is capable of. So, for example, only capturing that information once you've kind of gone through a full life cycle of working through with prospects, getting new customers and all of that, and having to work around not gathering that data at that stage and only gathering it later, or introducing like this legacy system or other systems earlier in the process. So you've got people who would ideally work in just one system, but working in several for each step of the way. So really just sort of a high overhead, difficult situation to be navigating. The The issues when you're working with platforms that don't necessarily support out of the box uh, the management of sensitive data is that you rely on sort of soft controls. Um, so instead of having these hard controls that are available to you, and for example, systems that are producing the necessary audits or the necessary levels of encryption on data, you've got to sort of supplement that with soft controls, training, keeping people working in particular boundaries, and relying on them to ensure your compliance. Now, there's always an element of that, even with systems that are compliant. But when you don't have these systems that are compliant fully, then you've got more reliance on the people, and that just introduces so much more risk. And that is, I think, in those days, a real challenge when you didn't have a system that end to end would support this kind of thing. So with HubSpot, one of the great things about HubSpot is ever since the very beginning of HubSpot, they have prioritized having really good APIs available to us. And to this day, we've seen a acceleration of the amount of APIs that we have available to us with HubSpot. And as new features come out, sort of closer parity to when the APIs become available. So long story short, we have a strong set of APIs that we can use to get information in and out of HubSpot. And that's what we used to facilitate this. So for example, we would connect in third-party systems, whether it was a GDPR or HIPAA compliant system, into HubSpot to kind of surface information on the screen that was actually stored in external systems. Or if we built something custom on a HIPAA compliant sort of data center and built something completely custom, we could connect that into HubSpot. So we were sort of able to bridge the gap and sort of have data stored in systems where it was compliant. The challenge there, though, is that, again, we were relying on people to use the system correctly, right? If you're working in HubSpot and you needed to capture some sensitive data, it was around training to say, well, don't capture it, for example, in the timeline on the contact record, but rather capture it in these custom fields, which are linked directly by API into a third-party system. But it's a lot easier to just forget that and just capture it into the timeline, for example, and then we've got that risk there. So again, cobbling these solutions together that kind of technically work, but are just not that easy to use and too easy to, I guess, break. So essentially, when it comes down to GDPR and all of these other data privacy regulations, there are, I guess, several controls that they prescribe that need to be in place for managing and handling sensitive data. They are fairly open-ended, which is great because that means that businesses can sort of choose how they address them. And the way that HubSpot have chosen to address them is to implement various features within HubSpot and also behind the scenes sort of hard controls. So, for example, encryption of the data at rest in HubSpot's data centers, but also field level encryption. They've introduced the ability to have more granular permissioning within HubSpot, so you can define who is allowed to have access to what data and when. They've also introduced far more stringent audit trails on data that you mark as sensitive as well, and sort of a variety of other features. And so these sort of address all of the sort of high level things that in the GDPR and other data privacy legislation specify need to be the case. So it's a combination of things that just out of the box HubSpot will do, and then the tools on top of that CRM administrators, if you will, and configure to ensure that the use of the system is compliant. I'd say it's the ones that I've addressed now. So it's one of the things that you really can't get away from is encrypting the data at rest, and encrypting it on sort of a field level. These audit controls are really important, and we'll use permissioning. And off the back of that, these tools and these features, they need to be implemented in a way that businesses are easily able to evidence that they are adhering to the standard, especially if they are assessed by third parties, if they've got sort of ISO compliance requirements or other sort of regulatory requirements such as HIPAA or things like that, where they may need to showcase that they are adhering to these principles. It's really important that a product like HubSpot produces these things like these audit controls. We can sort of track the history of when properties were changed and things like that. And these are all really important features to illustrate to a third party when it comes along to showcase the compliance. The example that I've spoken about in terms of senior living, we've seen some dramatic shifts in improvement to how that works for some of our customers. I suppose another one that we could talk about is on the education space. So the sort of use case here that we've seen is sort of working with either parents of potential students or students themselves, and marketing to them, gathering their information for purposes of enrolling them into courses. For the longest of time, you wouldn't necessarily be able to use HubSpot to capture all of this information. You'd be able to sort of capture some of it in HubSpot, and again, like I said, sort of cobble together their student application management system and get them to track things there. But oftentimes, you would get sort of the either the CV or the education history of the prospective student, and those would be uploaded in documents. And you want to kind of gather them early on in the process of engaging with parents or students. We would see that we would try and advise these prospects to not upload certain documents which might have their ID numbers or things like that, but it's really difficult to enforce. And so once we had these features available in HubSpot, we didn't even need to answer those questions anymore. We could bring this all up front. We had APIs now available to pull out sensitive data that was stored in HubSpot and sync it over into the third party tool and the application management system. It just made the whole process way simpler, and brought down the process. I recall looking at sort of lucid charts that we put together and say, all right, well, system person's going to be doing this into this system, then that's going to sync there, and future state sort of removed half the nodes, and that's what we saw. So definitely education space is one place where I think it's bringing HubSpot, being a real consideration for businesses in that space. We here at Huble, we went through the process of becoming ISO certified to the information security and the quality standards. And having gone through that, it made one of the many things that we learned during that, and what I learned is that adopting systems like HubSpot that are GDPR compliant or are compliant to HIPAA or anything like that, you can't, or even Huble as a business using Google Workspace as our primary document repository and all of that, which is it is HIPAA compliant, GDPR compliant. It's easy to make the mistake to think that if you're using a whole bunch of systems that, if you read their terms and conditions, they say we are GDPR compliant, we are ISO 27001 compliant, that you are compliant, because it's not the case. It's very easy to use systems in a way that contravenes what is required to be GDPR compliant. As a Google Workspace example, right? It's got strong capabilities for you to restrict who gets to see what documents. But if you use it wrong and you just share something to an entire organization or publicly, then you've breached GDPR, as an example. Same thing with HubSpot. Whilst it's now got the tools and it's got the encryption underneath, it's still up to the users to configure those user permissions correctly and all of that. And so it's really important that beyond just adopting technology that is compliant, that everybody using it is fully educated. They understand what is the GDPR, what is sensitive data, what do risks look like in my day-to-day, because technology by itself is not going to solve the problem. And that is what we're seeing. When we deal with some of our customers, when we onboard them, we ask them the question, who's your legal consultant? Who's your GDPR consultant? How are you addressing data privacy in your business? And sometimes our customers say, haven't really thought of that. Could you help us ensure that HubSpot is configured in the right way? And that's just evidence of the fact that businesses are a little bit behind in terms of understanding it's not just the tech that's going to support their compliance. I'd say AI is going to be a big influencer. I mean, it's going to be a challenge, but it's obviously also an opportunity. With the evolution of technology, AI aside, as technology evolves, the threats to data security evolve with that. There are more capabilities that malicious individuals can use to access data. On the same side, the technology evolves for the protection of that data and the implementation of more um, measures to protect it. With AI coming in and almost accelerating the capability of technology, we're going to see the accelerated capability of the threats against data. So I think that is going to be a big thing that's going to influence. And it's essentially up to, I guess, the good guys or the folks working on the systems to ensure that the AI is used for good as well as malicious behavior. So I think that's going to be a big thing. And with AI sort of as an industry on its own and its effect on sort of the go-to-market space in which we as Huble work, um, there is a big focus on the gathering of data to support the use of AI. And so with sort of this focus on gathering data and sort of having data available for the use of AI, it's going to increase the risk profile of businesses because they're just going to have more data. And if they are in the sort of education space, like we've spoken about, working in the healthcare space, having more and more data accessible to AI means it's accessible, it's going to be more accessible. And so more stringent uh, controls are going to need to be put in place. And that's going to be a challenge for businesses, I think. Well, GDPR compliance, data privacy compliance is a legal obligation, right? You can't get away from doing it. And if you don't do it, then essentially, yes, you run the risk of having some kind of breach, whether it is somebody unintentionally sharing something or you being hacked or anything like that. And if sensitive data is breached and exposed, and business is not prepared for it because there are certain things that businesses need to undertake. They need to notify the UK GDPR, for example. They need to identify the ICO in the UK to declare that breach. If that doesn't happen, then there are fines that can be issued. And even if that does happen, if the data breach is severe enough, that still there could be legal action taken. So, and we're seeing sort of in the news over and over that that businesses are being fined, and we see sort of really large businesses. We've seen large businesses in the social media space, and that really being hit with major fines, and it's getting closer and closer to home, right? As data privacy becomes more mature and commonplace, it's not just going to be the large businesses that are going to be impacted. It's going to be smaller businesses, consultancies that have to be protecting their data and dealing with this or facing the legal and financial and reputational consequences.